Don't save me. If I live, I'll never let you go.
Please, just let me help you.
Those were the first words he said to me while I knelt in the freezing rain, my hands soaked in his blood. I was just a girl with $20 in my pocket and a bus ticket home. But I couldn't leave a man to die in a dark alley, even if he was pointing a gun at my head. I didn't know then that the man I was saving wasn't just a stranger. He was a Viper King, the most feared Mafia boss in the city, and by saving his life, I had just forfeited my own freedom. 12 hours later, I didn't wake up in my cramped apartment. I woke up in a silk-lined bed inside a fortress of marble and gold, with 100 men in black suits bowing as I walked by. The stranger I saved was no longer bleeding. He was standing there, cold and powerful, telling the world that I was his life debt. But in his world, love is a death sentence, and the diamond necklace he just put around my neck, it's not a gift. It's a target for every assassin in the city. The pressure of Nimsu's hands against G. Park's chest was the only thing keeping his life from leaking into the muddy pavement. Her breath hitched as his grip on her wrist tightened, his knuckles white despite his loss of blood. Just as his eyes began to flutter shut, the quiet alley was shattered by the screech of tires and the blinding glare of high beams. Dark figures swarmed from the vehicles, their movements synchronized and lethal. Nimsu froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she didn't let go of the wound. "Get your hands off him," a voice barked. But before she could react, a tall man in a sharp suit, Noah, stepped into the light. He didn't attack. Instead, he stopped dead, his eyes widening as he saw the Viper King being held upright by a girl in a dirt-stained hoodie. With a silent signal, the men moved in, gently but firmly prying Nimsu away. She stumbled back, her hands trembling and covered in red. She expected him to leave her there, but Noah turned to her with a look that was more like a warning than a thank you. "You're coming with us," he said coldly. Before she could protest, she was ushered into the back of a luxury SUV. The scent of expensive leather masked the smell of rain, but it couldn't hide the fear rising in her throat. They drove in total silence until a massive iron gate swung open, revealing a sprawling estate that looked more like a fortress than a home. Nimsu was led through marble hallways that echoed with every step of her worn sneakers. She felt like a stray cat accidentally led into a palace. She was left alone in a room filled with gold accents and velvet furniture for what felt like hours. Suddenly, the double doors swung open. Nimsa gasped, standing up so fast she nearly tripped. It was G. Park. He wasn't the dying man from the alley anymore. He stood tall, his chest bandaged under a fresh black silk shirt that cost more than Nimsa made in a year. His presence was suffocating, radiating a dark authority that made the air feel heavy. He walked toward her, his footsteps slow and deliberate, until he was looming over her, forcing her to look up. His eyes were no longer unfocused. They were sharp, piercing, and terrifyingly possessive. He reached out, his thumb brushing a smudge of dirt off her cheek with a touch that was unexpectedly soft but felt like a brand. "I told you to leave, and you didn't listen," he rasped, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down her spine. "You saw me weak, Nimsu. In my world, that's a sin." "I save your life," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I just want to go home." G. Park leaned in closer, his shadow swallowing her whole. "You saved the king, but you inherited a war. My enemies saw your face. If you walk out those gates, you're a dead woman. You stay here until I decide you're safe. Consider this your reward or your prison." The heavy double doors of the master's suite didn't just lock. They sealed Nimsu away from the world she knew. By the next morning, her muddy hoodie and worn sneakers were gone, replaced by silk robes and slippers that felt like walking on clouds. 2 silent maids entered, laying out a row of dresses that shimmered under the chandelier light, like liquid diamonds. Each one cost more than Nimsu had earned in her entire life, but as she ran her fingers over the fabric, it felt cold, like the bars of a cell. "I don't want these," Nimsu whispered, her voice echoing in the vast, marble dressing room. "I just want my own clothes back." The maids didn't look up, their faces as blank as statues, as they draped a heavy gold necklace around her throat. It was beautiful, but it felt like a weighted collar. Later that afternoon, the doors finally opened, and Noah appeared to escort her downstairs. He led her not to a dining room, but to a high balcony overlooking a massive, glass-walled office. Below, Nimsu saw G Park. He was sitting behind a mahogany desk, looking immaculate in a charcoal suit. The vulnerability of the alleyway was completely erased. Standing before him were three men, trembling so violently their knees shook. "I gave you a simple task," G Park said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a terrifying, icy edge that froze the air in the room. "You failed. In my world, failure has a specific price." One of the men fell to his knees, begging for mercy, mentioning his family and his years of service. G Park didn't even blink. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He gave a small, casual wave of his hand, and several armed guards stepped forward, dragging the screaming men out of the room. The clinical, detached way he disposed of them made Nimsu's stomach turn. The man she had saved, the man whose heart she had felt beating beneath her blood-soaked palms, wasn't just a powerful businessman. He was a monster who traded in fear. A moment later, G Park looked up, his gaze locking onto Nimsu's through the glass. The coldness in his eyes shifted into something dark and hungry. He stood up and walked toward the stairs, his presence growing heavier with every step he took toward her. When he reached the balcony, he stood so close she could smell his expensive cologne. "Do you like the dress?" he asked, his voice dropping to that low, possessive rasp. "I saw what you did," Nimsa said, her voice trembling as she backed away. "You're a murderer." G Park laughed softly, a sound devoid of any real warmth. He reached out, his fingers tracing the gold necklace he had forced upon her. "I am a sovereign, Nimsu. I do what is necessary to keep this world at my feet. And now that you wear my mark, you are a part of this world too. You can hate me all you want, but you aren't leaving. You're the only thing in this house that isn't for sale, and I intend to keep it that way." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but it brought no warmth to the cold, echoing halls of the Park estate. Nimsa sat at a long, obsidian dining table, feeling smaller than ever in a dress of pale blue silk that draped over her like an unwanted skin. Before she could even touch her tea, the front doors were thrown open with a sharp, echoing bang. The woman who walked in didn't just enter a room. She owned the air within it. Her heels clicked against the marble with the precision of a ticking clock. This was Hygiene. She was draped in a tailored white suit that looked sharper than a knife, her dark hair pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to pull at the corners of her icy, cat-like eyes. She stopped a few feet from Nimsu, her gaze sweeping down with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "So, this is a little stray I've been hearing about," Hygiene said, her voice smooth and cold as a frozen lake. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked around the table, circling Nimsu like a predator assessing a weak link. "I expected a rival. Instead, G Park brings home a girl who still smells like the gutter and cheap rain." Nimsu stood up, her hands clenching the fabric of her expensive dress. "I'm not a stray. I saved his life." Hygiene let out a short, mocking laugh that felt like a slap. She reached out, using one gloved finger to lift a lock of Nimsu's light brown hair, then dropped it as if it were contaminated. "You performed a service. You are a bandage, nothing more. Do you really think a few stitches give you a seat at this table?" At that moment, the staff gathered in the foyer, watching in hushed silence. Hygiene noticed the audience, and her smile grew sharper. She picked up Nimsu's teacup, held it over the white linen tablecloth, and slowly tilted her hand. The dark liquid splashed across the table, staining the blue silk of Nimsu's skirt. "A dog should know its place, especially when it's wearing its master's charity," Hygiene hissed, leaning in so close that Nimsu could see the cold fire in her eyes. "G Park is my fiancé by blood and by business. You are a temporary amusement. By next week, he'll have forgotten your name, and I'll be the one who ensures you're put back on the street where you belong." Nimsu's face burned with humiliation as the tea soaked into her skin, but she didn't look away. For the first time, she saw the true face of the world G Park lived in. It wasn't just about guns and blood. It was about the cruelty of people who thought they were gods. As Hygiene turned on her heel to find G Park, Nimsu felt a new heat rising in her chest, not a fear, but a quiet, burning defiance. The war hadn't just reached her doorstep. It had just become personal. The tea stain on Nimsu's dress felt like a brand of shame as she walked through the glittering ballroom of the Grand Seoul Hotel. G. Park had insisted she attend the gala, claiming that hiding would only make her a bigger target. He walked beside her, a dark shadow in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. Every eye in the room was on them, some filled with curiosity, others, like Hai Jean's, filled with poisonous spite. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the soft hum of a string quartet, but Nimsu couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by more than just socialites. G. Park's body was tense, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. He didn't look like a man enjoying a party. He looked like a soldier waiting for the first shot. "Stay close to me," he leaned in and whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Don't look at the cameras, and don't let go of my hand." Suddenly, the music died. A single chandelier at the far end of the hall shattered, showering the guests in glass. Before the first scream could even leave someone's throat, the heavy oak doors burst open. Men in tactical gear, bearing the jagged, iron-fawn crest on their sleeves, flooded the room. The elegant gala transformed into a chaotic nightmare in seconds. "Get down!" G. Park roared, shoving Nimsu behind a marble pillar just as the first round of gunfire echoed through the hall. Nimsu huddled on the floor, her ears ringing. Through the smoke and panic, she saw a lone assassin perched on the mezzanine above, his rifle leveled directly at her. She was frozen, a deer in the headlights of a cold, metallic death. "G. Park," she screamed. He didn't hesitate. He didn't reach for his own weapon first. Instead, G. Park threw himself across the open space, his large frame completely eclipsing her small body. A sharp crack rang out, followed by a heavy thud. Nimsu felt the weight of him slump against her, his blood, warm and terrifyingly familiar, soaking into the pale blue silk of her shoulder. The guards quickly neutralized the threat, but Nimsu could only see the man in her arms. G. Park gripped the marble floor, his teeth gritted in agony as a dark crimson patch bloomed across his white dress shirt. "You're hit," she sobbed, her hand shaking as she tried to find the wound. "Why did you do that? You could have died." G. Park looked up at her, his face pale and sweating, but his gaze was as fierce as ever. He reached up, his bloody fingers curling around her neck to pull her closer. "I told you," he rasped, his voice straining against the pain. "You are the only thing that matters. My life belongs to you now." In that moment, the image of the monster who had coldly disposed of his men vanished. As she held him, Nimsu realized a terrifying truth. G. Park was a man of violence, but he had chosen to be her shield. He valued her life more than his own, and that realization was more frightening than any bullet. The days following the gala were a blur of recovery and silence. While G. Park healed in his private wing, Nimsu felt like a ghost wandering the gilded halls. Her gratitude for his sacrifice was a heavy weight, but that weight was about to be crushed. She was in the library when Hai Jean appeared, looking as composed and lethal as ever. She didn't come with insults this time. She came with a tablet and a cold, knowing smile. "You think he's a hero because he took a bullet?" Hai Jean whispered, sliding the screen across the marble table. "He didn't save you out of love, Nimsu. He saved you out of guilt." Nimsu looked down. The screen displayed property deeds, demolition orders, and bank transfers bearing the Park Syndicate's official seal. Her heart stopped. The dates matched perfectly with the year her childhood neighborhood was leveled to the ground. Thousands of families, including her own, had been forced into poverty so a luxury mall could be built. At the bottom of the final authorization was a signature she recognized all too well, G. Park. "He destroyed your life long before he met you in that alley," Hai Jean hissed, leaning in close. "He keeps you here like a pet, so he doesn't have to look at the wreckage he created. You aren't his savior, Nimsu. You're his penance." The world tilted. The silk dress she wore suddenly felt like a shroud made of the blood and tears of her neighbors. She didn't wait to hear more. Driven by a raw, blinding betrayal, Nimsu traded her gown for her old, hidden hoodie and slipped out through the servant's entrance during the changing of the guard. She ran until her lungs burned, her feet pounding against the pavement as she headed for the city's edge. She just wanted to disappear, to go back to being a nobody who didn't owe her life to a monster. But as she reached the dark, rain-slick highway at the city border, a line of black SUVs swerved across the road, blocking her path with terrifying precision. The door of the center vehicle opened. G. Park stepped out, his shoulders still bandaged, his face a mask of cold fury. The rain began to fall, drenching them both in seconds. "Step away from the line, Nimsu," he commanded, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You destroyed my home," she screamed, her voice breaking against the wind. "You're the reason my parents lost everything. Was saving me just a game to make you feel better?" G. Park walked toward her, ignoring the gunshots of distant thunder. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward him until their chests touched. "The world I run is cruel, and I have done things that would make you hate me forever," he rasped, his eyes dark and desperate. "But I will not let you leave. You belong to the man who took your home, and the man who took a bullet for you. You are mine, Nimsu, forever." The rainy confrontation at the border had left Nimsu shattered, but the walls of the estate felt more like a fortress than ever. For days, she stayed in her room, the evidence of G. Park's past crimes playing on a loop in her mind. G. Park was equally distant, consumed by a brewing war with a rival syndicate. However, the silence was finally broken when Noah arrived with a message. G. Park was called to an emergency summit, and Nimsu was to be moved to a secondary safe house for her protection. The transport seemed routine until a motorcade entered a narrow, dimly lit tunnel. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the lead car. The world spun into chaos. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of rapid gunfire echoed off the concrete walls. Before Nimsu could scream, the door of her SUV was ripped off its hinges. A man with a jagged scar across his cheek, the mark of the iron thong, reached in and dragged her out into the cold air. "You're a very expensive piece of bait, little girl," the man hissed, throwing her into the back of a nondescript van. Nimsu was taken to a derelict shipyard on the edge of the harbor. The air smelled of salt and rust. She was shoved into a chair in the center of a vast, empty warehouse, her hands bound tightly with coarse rope. High above in the shadows, snipers took their positions, their laser sights dancing across the floor like red ghosts. A tall man with silver hair and a heavy cane stepped into the light. This was the Iron Fong. He looked at Nimsu not with hatred, but with a chilling, predatory curiosity. He pulled out a phone and dialed a number, his thumb hovering over the speakerphone button. "Viper King," the Iron Fong said, his voice echoing in the hollow space. "I have something of yours. She looks quite small in this big warehouse. If you want her back, come alone to Pier 17. No guards, no backup. If I see a single suit, the girl dies first." On the other end of the line, the silence was deafening, followed by a low, guttural growl that didn't sound human. "If you touch a single hair on her head," G. Park rasped, "I will dismantle your entire lineage while you watch." The Iron Fong laughed, hanging up the phone. He looked at Nimsu, who was trembling but staring back with defiant eyes. "He's coming for you," the rival boss whispered. "He's walking right into a kill zone. I wonder, when the bullets start flying, will he try to save himself, or will he die trying to reach you?" Nimsu closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the dirt on her cheek. She finally understood the weight of the war she had inherited. She wasn't just a guest or a prisoner anymore. She was the weapon they were using to kill the man who had promised to never let her go. The silence of the shipyard was broken by the steady, rhythmic clicking of a single pair of shoes against the concrete. Nimsu looked up, her breath hitching in her throat. Through the haze of the warehouse, a lone figure emerged from the darkness. It was G. Park. He was dressed in black, his face like a mask of carved stone, but his eyes were fixed solely on Nimsu. The Iron Fong stood up, his silver hair shimmering under the dim industrial lights. "You actually came alone," the rival boss mused, signaling to the snipers in the rafters. A dozen red laser dots instantly converged on G. Park's chest, hovering over his heart like hungry insects. "Let her go," G. Park said. His voice was quiet, but it vibrated with a terrifying power that made the air feel heavy. "Not so fast," the Iron Fong countered, gesturing to a guard who pressed a knife against Nimsu's neck. You're far too dangerous to talk to while you're armed. Drop the gun, Viper King. Drop it, or she bleeds right here. Nimsu shook her head frantically, her muffled cries lost behind the tape on her mouth. She wanted to scream at him to run, to save himself, to not be a fool for a girl he barely knew. But G. Park didn't hesitate. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his gold-plated handgun. He held it up for everyone to see, then tossed it aside. It clattered against the floor, sliding into the shadows. I'm unarmed, G. Park rasped, his eyes never leaving Nimsu's. Now move the knife. The Iron Fong smiled, a slow and crooked thing. He nodded to his men, instead of releasing Nimsu, for a large guard stepped forward and surrounded G. Park. The first blow was a heavy kick to his ribs that sent him to his knees. Nimsu let out a strangled sob as she watched the man who had always seemed invincible collapse under the weight of the assault. The beating was systematic and brutal. They used their boots and the butts of their rifles, hitting him again and again. G. Park didn't fight back. He didn't even groan. Every time he was knocked down, he pushed himself back up, his face becoming a mask of blood and bruises, just so he could keep looking at Nimsu. He was showing the Iron Fong that no amount of pain could make him look away from the woman he had claimed as his own. Is this the great sovereign? The Iron Fong mocked, raising his cane to strike G. Park across the face. Just as the silver-haired man leaned in for a final blow, the warehouse roof exploded in a shower of glass and steel. Now! Noah's voice roared over the intercom. Smoke grenades filled the room with thick, white fog. In the chaos, the sound of G. Park's backup arrived like a thunderclap. Through the smoke, Nimsu felt strong, trembling arms wrap around her. It was G. Park. He was covered in blood, his breathing ragged and broken, but he was the one cutting her ropes. He pulled her against his shattered chest, his heart beating wildly against hers. I told you, he whispered into her hair, his voice weak but fierce. I would never let you go. The aftermath of the shipyard massacre didn't bring the freedom Nimsu had hoped for. Instead, the world grew smaller, colder, and quieter. G. Park didn't take her back to the estate in the city. Instead, the motorcade drove for hours into the mountains, ending at a secluded villa hidden behind high stone walls and electric wire. He had survived the beating, but the experience had snapped something inside him. The man who was once a distant king had become an obsessive shadow. You aren't safe out there, G. Park told her, his voice raspy as he sat in an armchair, his face still mapped with bruises and bandages. The Iron Fong was just the beginning. From now on, you stay where I can see you. Nimsa soon realized he meant that literally. Every corner of the beautiful, lonely villa was equipped with sleek, black security cameras. Their unblinking lenses followed her from the kitchen to the library and even into her bedroom. There were no more walks in the garden without 3 armed guards trailing 5 paces behind her. The golden cage had become a high-tech prison. Days bled into weeks. G. Park showered her with everything a person could want. Rare fruits, designer loungewear, and books. But he refused to give her a phone or connection to the outside world. When he came home from the city, he would spend hours just watching her, his eyes dark with a hunger that felt like possession. He would brush her hair or hold her hand, murmuring about how she was the only pure thing in his life. But Nimsu wasn't the same girl who had bravely pressed her hoodie against a stranger's wound in a dark alley. The fire in her eyes was dimming. She stopped asking to go home. She stopped fighting the guards. She spent most of her time staring out the reinforced glass windows at the mountains she wasn't allowed to climb. The vibrant, selfless girl was being replaced by a silent doll in silk robes. One evening, she caught a reflection in a hallway mirror. She looked like a ghost. The dirt-smudged, determined face was gone, replaced by a hollow-cheeked woman wearing a diamond necklace that felt as heavy as a lead chain. She realized with sudden, sharp pang of grief that G. Park wasn't protecting her from his enemies anymore. He was protecting his prize from herself. He had traded her spirit for her safety, and as she watched the little red light of the camera blink in the corner of the ceiling, Nimsu wondered if there was anything left of the girl who had dared to save the Viper King. The isolation of the villa had turned the world into a silent velvet tomb, but outside the stone walls, a different kind of storm was gathering. Hygiene stood in a dimly lit boardroom, her eyes reflecting the cold light of a dozen computer screens. Across from her sat the syndicate elders, men with faces like crumpled parchment who valued profit over G. Park's obsession. They saw Nimsu as a flaw in their armor, a weakness that made their king soft. He has moved the syndicate's assets to protect a girl who belongs in the mud, Hygiene said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. If you won't remove her, we will. Do I have your blessing to clean our house? The elders looked at one another, their silent nod sealing a death warrant. The next morning, a fake message arrived at the villa. It appeared to be from Noah, claiming that G. Park had been injured in the city and was calling for Nimsu. The brave girl inside her flickered back to life for a moment. Despite the cameras and the locks, her instinct to save him was still there. She hurried into the waiting black sedan, not noticing that her usual guards had been replaced by men with cold, unfamiliar eyes. As the car wound down the narrow mountain pass, the driver's hands tightened on the wheel. Nimsa looked out the window, watching the jagged cliffs give way to a deep, rushing river below. Suddenly, the driver slammed his foot onto the accelerator. The engine roared, the car lurching forward with terrifying speed. "What are you doing?" "Slow down." Nimsa screamed, reaching for the door handle. It was locked. The driver looked at her through the rearview mirror, his expression empty. "The elders send their regards," he muttered. With a violent jerk of the steering wheel, the car crashed through the rusted guardrail. Time seemed to slow down. Nimsu felt the sickening weightlessness of the fall, the world spinning in a blur of gray sky and green water. She saw the river rushing up to meet her, a cold, hungry giant. The impact was a bone-shattering explosion of sound and light. Ice-cold water shattered the windows, filling the cabin in seconds. Nimsu struggled against her seatbelt, her lungs burning as the car began to sink into the dark depths. Through the glass, she saw the silhouette of a second car stopping at the cliff's edge. Hygiene stepped out, watching with a satisfied smile as the ripples on the surface of the river slowly vanished. To the world, it was a tragic accident. To the syndicate, it was a necessary execution. As the darkness swallowed her, Nimsu's last thought wasn't the luxury or the war, but the rain-slicked alley where it had all begun. The roaring sound of the river was replaced by the soft, rhythmic chirping of birds and the scent of lavender. When Nimsu finally opened her eyes, the world was no longer cold and gray. She was lying in a sun-drenched bedroom with white lace curtains that danced in a gentle breeze. Her head throbbed with a dull ache, and when she tried to reach back into her mind for a name, a face, or a reason why she was there, she found nothing but a vast, terrifying blankness. The door creaked open, and a man stepped inside. He wasn't wearing a sharp suit or a dark scowl. He was dressed in a simple linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were free of blood. His face, once a mask of terrifying authority, was now soft and filled with a warmth that Nimsu found strangely comforting. "You're awake," he whispered, sitting on the edge of bed and taking her hand. His touch was gentle, lacking the possessive iron grip she couldn't remember. "Who are you?" Nimsu asked, her voice raspy and thin. "Where am I?" The man squeezed her hand, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. "My name is G. Park. We're in a small village far from the noise of the city. You had a terrible accident. Nimsu, the doctor said the shock might make you forget things for a while." "Are we related?" she asked, searching his eyes for a spark of recognition. "I'm your husband," he lied, the words flowing from his lips with smooth, practiced ease. "I'm just a simple businessman who moved us here, so we could have a quiet life, away from the stress of my work. We were happy here, Nimsu, just the two of us." Over the next few weeks, G. Park meticulously built a world of beautiful lies. He removed every trace of the Park syndicate, every weapon, and every camera. He spent his days gardening with her, walking to the wildflower meadows, and telling her stories of fake pasts where they had met at university library and fallen in love over coffee. He watched her laugh for the first time, a real, bright sound that hadn't existed in the mountain villa. G. Park saw the brave girl returning, but she was different now. She was happy because she was ignorant. He knew that outside this peaceful valley, Hygiene and the Iron Fawn were still searching for a body, and his empire was crumbling without its king. But as he watched Nimsu paint by the window, her face free of a fear he had once put there, he decided he didn't care. He had stolen her memories to save her soul, and as long as she never remembered the alleyway or the blood, he could pretend he wasn't a monster. He was the ultimate memory thief, and his greatest prize was her smile. The peace of the wildflower meadow was shattered by the sound of a luxury engine idling at the edge of the valley. Nimsu was sitting on a wooden bench, a sketchbook in her lap, when the shadow of a woman fell over her. She looked up, expecting to see the gentle face of the man she believed was her husband. Instead, she saw a woman with eyes as cold as glass and a smile that felt like a razor's edge. Hygiene stood there, her white suit a stark, clinical contrast to the natural beauty of the village. "So, this is where the King of Shadows came to play house," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. Nimsu stood up, her heart beginning to race with a fear she didn't understand. "I don't know who you are. My husband, G. Park, will be back soon." "Husband." Hygiene laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Is that what he told you? He isn't your protector, Nimsu. He's your captor. He didn't move you here to start a life. He moved you here because he failed to keep you alive in his own world. He stole your memories because he was too much of a coward to let you hate him for the monster he really is." Nimsa backed away, her head beginning to throb with a sudden, stabbing pain. "You're lying. We have a happy life here." "A happy lie," Hygiene hissed, stepping into Nimsa's personal space. She pulled a crumpled, blood-stained hoodie from a bag and threw it at Nimsa's feet. "Does this look like a simple businessman's wife's clothing? This is what you were wearing the night you saved a man who eventually destroyed your home. This is what you were wearing when he locked you in a golden cage." Nimsu stared at the hoodie. The sight of the faded fabric and the dark, iron-scented stains acted like a key turning in a rusted lock. The blank walls in her mind began to crumble. Suddenly, the sunlight seemed to turn gray. The scent of lavender was replaced by the smell of rain and copper. The floodgates opened. She saw the dark alley. She felt the cold gun barrel against her forehead. She heard the roar of the car as it plummeted toward the river. She saw G. Park's face, not as a gentle gardener, but as a ruthless sovereign who had watched his men be dragged away to their deaths. "I remember," Nimsu whispered, her knees buckling as the weight of the trauma crashed over her. The shipyard, the cameras, the river. G. Park appeared at the gate, his arms full of groceries. But the moment he saw Hygiene, the bag dropped, spilling fruit across the dirt like drops of blood. His face transformed instantly, the warmth vanishing to reveal the cold, lethal Viper King. "Get away from her," he roared. Nimsa looked at him, but she didn't see her husband. She saw a stranger who had built a paradise out of lies. "You lied to me," she screamed, her voice raw with the agony of 1,000 returned memories. "You didn't save me. You just kidnapped me twice." The farmhouse kitchen was silent, save for crackling of the fireplace and the heavy, ragged breathing of two people who had reached the end of their rope. Nimsu stood by the wooden table, her eyes red from crying, looking at G. Park as if he were a ghost. The truth hung between them like a jagged blade. "I love the man I thought you were," Nimsu whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "The man who gardened with me. The man who was gentle. But that man was a ghost, G. Park. I can never love the Viper King. I can't love a man whose throne is built on the ruins of my home and the blood of his enemies." G. Park stood paralyzed, his hands reaching out but stopping short of touching her. For the first time, the sovereign looked truly defeated. "I did it to keep you safe," he rasped. "I would do it all again just to see you smile." "Then you still don't understand," she said, a single tear falling. "Your protection is a cage. Your love is a war. If you really want me to be happy, then leave. Let the Viper King die." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Finally, G. Park bowed his head. "If that is the only way for you to live in peace, then the Viper King dies today." That night, a massive fire broke out at the Park Syndicate's main headquarters in the city. Witnesses spoke of a man burning a thick, leather-bound ledger, the book that held the secrets of every crime and debt in the underworld. By dawn, the news reported a tragic explosion. The body of the sovereign was never found, but his reign was over. Noah, his most loyal lieutenant, was left to pick up the pieces of a dismantled empire, while Hygiene found herself holding a crown that had lost all its value. 6 months later, Nimsu had moved back to a quiet town, far from the city and the mountains. She had opened a small flower shop, her hands once again stained with soil instead of blood. One rainy evening, as she was locking the front door, she saw a shadow at the end of the street. A man was standing there, drenched by the rain. He wasn't wearing a silk suit or a diamond watch. He wore a simple, worn jacket and a pair of jeans. His face was clear of the cold arrogance he once carried. He looked tired, humble, and remarkably ordinary. Nimsu froze, the keys slipping from her fingers. G-Park. He stepped into the light of the shop window. He didn't loom over her, and he didn't claim her as his property. He stayed back, his eyes searching hers with soft, nervous hope. "The king is dead, Nimsu," he said quietly. "I'm just a man who owes his life to a girl in a hoodie. I don't have a throne or a war anymore. I just have myself. Is that enough for us to start over?" Nimsu looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the stranger she had saved in the alley. For the first time, there were no shackles between them. She took a step forward, held out her hand, and smiled. The war was over, and finally they were both free.